button is, we'll open up the chat group. Please feel free to type in questions, responses, share ideas, whatever it is you want to do during the meeting. I will ask you not to interrupt Sue during the presentation, but let her go through it. We will have question and answers and discussions at the end. If you want to unmute yourself temporarily, you can press the space bar. That just unmutes you for a few moments while you say one sentence or so on. Otherwise, you press the mute, unmute button at the bottom of your screen. We're also going to ask for feedback. So during the presentation, on every slide, there is a web address and a code number. So if you go to that web address on a separate window or a separate tab of your browser, it'll ask you to enter a code number, which is 6 digits long. You enter that code number, and there are 2 questions that are asked, and I will share the results of what people have said at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, put whatever you want in the chat. If you want to share a link to something fascinating in the chat, if you've got a good piece of information, please do so. The chat can be saved at the end of the presentation or at the end of the meeting. All right, so are you ready, Sue? Can I hand over to you?
Right, so I should just, hang on.
I unmuted you.
I suddenly thought that. Just let me play with the technology a little, and I'll get the presentation up. Have I done that? I think so. So hopefully you should now see a screen which says building back better. Good, yes, right, we'll carry on. So, well, thank you for joining us in this first webinar of the Grant Rule Trust, as Peter said. So I was going to start with a word about the Grant Rule Trust, particularly for those who are new to it, but also for those who've maybe known the name for a while, but not clear where we are with it, what we're doing. So the Grant Rule Trust was founded in 2012 by Grant's widow, that's me, Sue Rule, and our daughters, Lindsay and Helen. It's governed by a deed of trust registered in England. I'm conscious we have people from Scotland as well as England and elsewhere here. But it's an English charity, so governed by a deed of trust, which you can find actually on our website at grantrule.org, should you feel the need to look up. So the 3 founding trustees, that's the family, obviously had quite a lot to deal with when we lost Grant in 2011. And we spent some time thinking about what the concept and purpose of the Grant Rule Trust should be, what we wanted it to be doing. Grant was a person with great breadth of interests, and so there was a very disparate network of people who knew him, some through his business activities. He worked in software systems engineering, and also through his music with Pig's Ear Folk Group and our annual Folk Ale Festival. Obviously through his family and people who lived in Edenbridge, where we spent 33 years, brought up the children. And through his passion for things like environmental stewardship was something very important, dear to his heart, as was folk music, British history, social history of Britain, really. Lots of other interests. And one of the things was that breadth of experience we felt, and interest, we felt that was one of the reasons why Grant always had a uniquely original take on things. He could bring something different to any analysis of a problem or an issue. And it gave him all sorts of ideas. And it was that cross-fertilization between different disciplines, different experiences, that we wanted to capture within the Grant Rule Trust. So that's why we felt that this idea of cultivating inclusive communities best summed up that ability to bring together different stories, different experiences, different expertise to create something new. So we see the trust as helping people come together in a creative space in a world that sort of drives us all apart. And in 2019, last year, the family realised that actually, if we were going to take the trust forward and try and achieve some of the things we wanted to achieve with it, we needed to bring in some extra effort. We needed some more people on board. We put out the call for volunteers, and I'm very pleased now to be welcoming Peter Leeson and Paul Hookham onto the board of trustees for the Grant Rule Trust. Both Peter and Paul knew Grant through his business activities, and they bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to the trust. And I think that opens up quite an exciting future for us. But I think exciting probably isn't how you see the future right now, and it's not really how I see the future right now either. I think uncertain is more accurate, or maybe even downright scary. But one thing I think we can be sure of is that the coronavirus pandemic is a game changer. I don't think the world will ever be quite the same again. But the question is, what will it look like? So, sorry, it's not gin, it's water. What we're looking at here is a scenario created by a chap called Simon Mayer, who is a research fellow in ecological economics at the Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity at the University of Surrey. Now, I have to say, I'd heard of the University of Surrey. I didn't know there was a Centre for Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity, and I didn't know you could be a fellow in ecological economics. But I'm very glad there is, and I'm very glad you can be. And it actually shows the depth and wealth of academic research into how we can create a better society, a better future for us all. The academic work has all been done, it's all out there. What's lacking is the political will to implement it. And I think that's we're at the tipping point now. We've got to generate that political will. So Simon has been looking here from an economic perspective of the possible future states in terms of the centralised government response and the distributed community response, the response of ordinary people. And he divides it up into a response that's driven by prioritising exchange value, the economy basically, or the response that prioritises life and sees the economy as serving that. And he says that versions of all these futures are perfectly possible, but not equally desirable. And I think if we look at these squares, probably the least desirable state is what Simon calls barbarism. It's, I think in the shorthand terms, barbarism really means the breakdown of civil society. It's every man for himself, every woman for herself mentality that just fights over the scraps, and it's unstable, it's unpleasant, people die, it's just not good. And what he suggests is that you go through this period until you gather around one of the other more stable states, because the other three can be stable states, but that one isn't, and it's very unpleasant. But if we look at the other one, the centralised response that prioritises economy, exchange value, money, whatever you want to call it, and which he calls state capitalism, there are issues with simply adopting that response again, because we know already that this dedicated way of reviewing the economy as the be-all and end-all of political decision-making is creating great tensions within human societies in increasing the divide between rich and poor to a totally unsustainable state. And possibly more importantly, it's actually destroying the planet we all live on. It is causing huge environmental impact, and we cannot go on doing the same things, expect to get different results. We know the dangers of simply carrying on the way we were before. But if we drop down the scale to the priority, the response that prioritizes life, when we look at state socialism, well, that sounds rather more attractive in that the state is seeking to safeguard the health and well-being of individuals, which is much more what we want. But I know that that always raises a spectre in ordinary people's minds of the state control, a loss of individual freedom. And that also is not the best place to be. It's better than barbarism, but it's still, you know, we've spent a long time and fought a lot of battles to win individual freedoms. We do not want to be losing that. So that has its dangers as well, but it is, I think, preferable to just going the way we're going, but that's the discussion to have. Where we're really focusing in terms of the Grant Will Trust is down in this little green square in the right-hand corner, in mutual aid. I mean, the Grant Will Trust, as I said, has a remit to cultivate inclusive communities, and that is precisely this decentralised mutual aid response that prioritises the protection of life. So that's where we're really adding our two pennyworth. Now, I think most ordinary decent folk you meet going down the street would probably put life above economic return. And I think we've seen that during the pandemic around the world and on our doorsteps. The problem is that we're up against a system that prioritises exchange value, an economic system that we all live and have to live and work and manage in. Because we're here under the current system, people and planet support the money, support the economy. It drives all our behaviours and our political decisions. And we need to be in a place where the economy is supporting the well-being of people and planet. The reason the current system is failing us, I believe, is because it's driven by, Grant was a measurement specialist, and what I think we have at the moment is a catastrophic case of measurement dysfunction. The current system is driven by gross domestic product, GDP. This is an indiscriminate measure of economic activity that doesn't distinguish between building a prison or building a hospital. They're both seen as equally beneficial. If you walk rather than drive a car, and you enhance your health by so doing, that has a negative impact on GDP because you haven't bought a car and you haven't bought any petrol and you haven't bought any insurance. So that's not good for GDP. Very good for you, it's quite good for the environment, but it's not good for GDP. If you're a full-time parent or a carer, negative effect on GDP. You're not working, you're not part of the system. In fact, you're pretty much invisible. This is kind of where my journey started with this thinking, because I couldn't get my head around the fact that when I left paid employment to look after my children, when my first daughter was born, society suddenly seemed to think I was less important than when I was working as a secretary. And how does that, you know, my brain couldn't marry those two things up, didn't make any sense. So it's measuring the wrong thing, and it's driving catastrophically dysfunctional behaviours at all levels, from the individual to the corporate. And it delivers dismally poor government, because actually economic growth is the only topic of political debate. How often do you hear more left-wing parties perhaps propose something that's going to benefit people who are suffering under the system, only to be told, How do we pay for it? How can you afford it? We can't do it. Well, I think what we've seen recently is a breakdown in meaningful political debate. It's become a slanging match. We've got terribly polarised opinions. It's unpleasant to live in. It's not really getting us anywhere. And I think it's because mainstream politics and mainstream media are locked into this mindset of this old and I believe dying system. And what's happened is that government is increasingly abdicating its role in nurturing the common good. I don't think we can move forwards until we recognise that the drivers behind the whole system have to change. And that will take time, and we can't do it in the Grant Rule Trust. The only message, the takeaway message I want from this is that it does take time, and we shouldn't despair just because it hasn't happened yet. This is a massive global culture change. And I think the monster's moving. I think actually, if we take the point at which humanity first began to get an awareness of the damage this system was doing to the environment specifically, which I take to be around about the 1950s, the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962. I think we've made quite a lot of progress. We've got to the point where we are having a global conversations at the United Nations. It's on the table as a topic of political discussion right now, right here, amongst us. So I think we're getting somewhere. It's just that the noise is all coming from the shallow end. It's coming from the old centralised powers who have benefited most under that system and do not want to let it go. So my next thing is looking at the story that allows those centralised powers to dictate so much of what happens. I think for all of my life, probably my parents' lifetime as well, and going on and now, they've lived in a culture that idolises individual freedom. It's a fundamental driver of American culture, which of course has been the dominant culture of our world. You've just got to think of all the cowboy heroes and the supermen, you know, and the one heroic hero comes in riding into the rescue. Think of the rags to riches myths of capitalism, you know, Barrow boy make good type thing. Even the idea that anyone can become president, as if being president was all about individual ambition rather than the security and prosperity of the country. I think this culture places hugely unrealistic expectations on people, particularly on women who are supposed to be super sophisticated career persons and brilliant mothers and able to cook, sew and, I don't know, do something else with your left toe whilst cracking walnuts. I don't know. I'm not one of those women, so I don't know. But I think the unrealistic expectations and people have of themselves. But it also places hugely unrealistic expectations on people in the public eye, and particularly on politicians, I think. And that's why you get people who I believe are not really suited to be in positions of leadership, but they're the only ones who are sufficiently self-confident to think that they can do it. So it has that dysfunctional effect. The other effect of individualism is that it's always looking for someone to blame. If everything is down to individual capabilities and individual decisions and individual choices, then when it goes wrong, it must be somebody's fault or some group of individuals that's to blame. And so that's why you get all the conspiracy theories on social media. Which group of people has caused this? And it breeds like some, you know, like a disease, I suppose. You know, if the economy is not delivering for you, well, there must be a bunch of others somewhere who are scrounging off hardworking people like you and me. Oh, we've got a problem, climate change. Well, we caused it, so it must be down to you to fix it. And if you're not an environmental saint and you haven't given up your car and you're not turned vegan, then you can just shut up about the environment, can't you? And we've even seen it now with coronavirus. Instead of, it's all been pushed back to individual responsibility, to take responsibility for self, make your own decisions, make your own call. And I think we're beginning to see that slightly fall apart, but I'm not going to go into politics on that. But this obsession with individual freedom, precious though it is, it does deny the fact that humans are social animals. We actually need connections to each other and to nature, and we need love. And because we deny that, I think individualism can so easily become the voice of privilege, the voice of entitlement. This was something I hadn't quite twigged. But it was my younger daughter, Helen, who pointed out to me, Helen's background has been in international development. She's worked with some very poor communities, and she's seen how amazingly creative and positive they can be with very little. And you compare it to those of us who have a lot more and how discontent we often are. And I think that's when you begin to realize that very often what we claim is the pursuit of freedom is actually the voice of entitlement speaking. And I think that's very apparent now that some of that behaviour is coming through. And I don't think we can look to our government to take the lead on this, really. And it certainly can't be the responsibility of the individual to fix it. I think we have to rediscover collective responsibility, collective power, collective action. Because when we come together, ordinary people are powerful. So I'm going to go back to that mutual aid square, because I think mutual aid is what we've seen in so many communities and neighbourhoods during lockdown. We've seen people helping each other out, people going and talking to neighbours from a distance that they've never spoken to before, people looking out for vulnerable people in their communities, people just going out and showing their intuitive appreciation of the essential workers, and particularly the health workers. And even just things like connecting on the internet as we are, talking to each other, saying there's something wrong here, there's something we need to put right. It shows that there's a deep desire in people to do this. And I think these groups and networks that are springing up, and have been springing up actually in recent years, as the pain of this strange way of governing has begun to be felt in different ways. I think these are going to have an effect on community politics. Interesting combination of words there, I've just realised. But the way we think about politics for months and years to come, and the people who are most engaged in trying to change the political system are the ones most active in these community initiatives. I think there is, we've put together the people, the little groups that sprang up throughout the Brexit argument, the existing campaigners that have been for a long time protesting about the environmental issues coming together. There are a lot of people in Extinction Rebellion who realised that the politics of protest, which I think is what we've had a lot of recently, is not enough. We need systemic change to tackle the environmental problem. And I think we need systemic change to tackle the aftermath of COVID-19 as well. So I think that this huge upsurge is coming together of community sentiment, and it is beginning to coalesce around prioritising life over exchange value. Which is not to say that exchange value is not important, it is vitally important. Protecting human life does demand a certain level of economic activity. We've got to be sensitive to that. It's about getting the balance, talking to each other about how we make this work better. Because I think the barbarians are out there too, telling us it's all about individual freedom. So, as I said, I think we've got this coming together activity. These are things that I've been hearing, these messages from all sorts of other webinars, from all sorts of other groups, saying the same things. So we're really talking about, coming to be focusing later about what the Grant Will Trust's role is in this. But when we talk about prioritising life over exchange value, that's basically, there is already an organisation, an umbrella organisation called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And this sort of grouping brings together groups, individuals and governments working to develop that economy that prioritises life. I kind of think of this is changing the points on the direction of travel. And it's, instead of measuring national performance in terms of GDP, we're measuring it by the health and well-being of the people and the country itself. This Wellbeing Economy Alliance, WEALL, has come up with these principles of what are the hallmarks of a wellbeing economy. You can read them off the screen. I think 5 is actually quite interesting. Participation. Citizens are actively engaged in their communities and locally rooted economies. It's about bringing things back to a human scale, really. So WEALL organises its activities in clusters, and those clusters are government, business and finance, and knowledge, and narrative. And narrative is basically the story individuals and communities tell ourselves about who we are and what success means. We don't just starting this journey, well-being agenda. It's only just touching the edges of old systems and old habits and old mindsets. But it is gaining traction, I think, as the cracks in the old system become ever more apparent. And I think it is interesting that there is a government strand to WEALL. In 2018, Scotland, Iceland and New Zealand set up the Wellbeing Economy Governance Initiative, and the Welsh Assembly has just joined this group. I think it's worth looking at why Scotland is in there as a founding member of this group, and perhaps why England is lagging behind. Scotland's political history is socialist. Election after election, Scotland voted Labour and ended up being governed by Conservatives from Westminster. I think this is largely what fuels the independence movement. So the Scottish government, like Scottish independence, is based on state socialism, if you remember our 4 squares of the centralised response. It's been more in that lower square always than the top one. And that makes it inclusive nationalism. And Scotland has there is a pragmatic reason why it's inclusive nationalism. Scotland has a dwindling and ageing population, and it actually needs immigrants. Yeah, I will share you. There was a joke that one of my friends, musician friends in Scotland, who is a staunch nationalist, Scottish nationalist, he published a joke on Facebook about a year ago, and it was called the Scottish Citizenship Test. And it said, question, do you want to be Scottish? Answer, no. Response, oh, you do, try again. Question, do you want to be Scottish? Answer, yes. Response, great, you're in. Which is not to say there isn't any racism and bigotry in Scotland, of course there is, but that's not the leadership tone. The leadership tone is welcoming people. You are Scottish if you want to be Scottish. Down in our main government, in the UK government, we have very entrenched state capitalism and a very strong mantra of individual liberty. And we can see that Labour's socialist agenda just suffered a major electoral defeat just at the end of 2019. So it's quite easy to see why there's tension between Westminster and Holyrood, between England and Scotland. But it's actually tension between the centralised responses. I think we need to try and build on the similarities between the distributed response. And part of that is, well, what difference does it make? What difference does it make when you have a different centralised response going on? And I think I'm a recent immigrant to Scotland from the wilds of southeast England. I've only been here, what, 3 years now. And I think there is a difference living under, that different regime of the Scottish government. If you go to the WEAL website, you can see a TED talk on wellbeing economics delivered by Nicola Sturgeon. But I do appreciate that Scotland is not the first exemplar to spring to English minds when you talk about health and well-being. Actually, that's why the Scottish government are tackling it. They are actually trying to do something that will bring about real results. You can argue about how effectively they do it or not. That's politics. But they are trying to do it. And this representation of Scotland's national performance framework is the sort of measures of success that Scotland is aspiring to. I think particularly draw your attention to we live in communities that are inclusive, empowered, resilient, and safe. There's actually been quite a lot of mutual aid going on in Scotland for some years. We've got more of an infrastructure behind communities and social enterprises, I think, than was my experience in England. We have a lot of community councils, some more effective than others, but they're there. And we have examples such as the island Reg, where the community bought the island out. And they're not alone. There's lots and lots of bits of community-owned land throughout Scotland. My own village, Blairmore, has a parcel that we're trying to figure out what to do with at the moment, what best to do with it. And it's interesting that the wellbeing journey, I think, has gone beyond aspiration into Scottish government policy, because they are providing funding where they provide funding, if there's any funding left after the crisis, but what funding there is, you have to demonstrate, or communities need to be able to demonstrate their positive environmental impact in order to qualify to get that funding, and that applies to funding and support for businesses as well. And so this holistic approach is beginning to come through the drivers that the Scottish Government is seeking to implement. And they're also seeking to address the endemic lack of trust of politicians that we all suffer from, by being more open to dialogue, to two-way conversations about how we do this thing. This is all new. None of us quite know where we're going. So how do we do it? Let's do it together. One of the things Grant got interested in shortly before he died was permaculture. I'm not a great expert on permaculture, but basically permaculture is not just about cultivating the soil. It is about studying patterns in nature and using those to inform human activities and human constructs. And it's a principle of permaculture that change comes not from the centre, where those who benefited most from the existing system tend to gather. It comes from the margins. And I think here in the Highlands of Scotland, we're on the margins. And I honestly believe change is coming. So what part can we play in that change? But how can we help? That's what we're here to discuss, really. So in summary, I would say the Grant Will Trust will be setting our strategic compass by the principles of wellbeing economics. We're in the process of affiliating the Trust to the WEAL global community, which gives us access to a lot of research and case studies and interactions, opportunities to learn and share experiences with people around the world. If you go to the WEAL website, which I should put up there, but I will share afterwards, you can see just how many countries there are involved, different youth hubs in different countries, government hubs, all over the place. It's a very broad and I think it's gathering momentum, this Wellbeing Economic Alliance. It was only founded, I think, 2018. So we're affiliating trust to that network, and we'll be looking to work with businesses, communities and individuals to design and deliver a new normal where the economy serves people and planet. Within that, we've identified 3 strands of activity: localization, sustainability and well-being. We're still working on what those terms mean in detail, but my initial thoughts are that localization is about economy and services and bringing them back to a human level where you've got people interacting with people rather than being told what to do and what they can have and how to behave by some remote CEO or remote politician. Sustainability is about managing our relationship with nature, improving the balance between human activity and the natural world in which we live. And that, again, I think needs to be done on a local level. It needs to be done on a manageable level. It's the old green guiding principle of think global but act local. So you connect to people around the world, but you're all working in the terms dictated by your own local environment, which again is really another principle of permaculture. And last but probably most important is well-being. And this is basically seeing every individual human being on this planet as just that, as a sovereign individual, a person who should have the right to all those principles of well-being that was on the previous slide: dignity, the basics of human life and welfare, and to be treated with respect and not, not shouted down because they don't agree with you or because you're black, white or pink with polka dots on or something. It doesn't matter. There's actually respect for individuals and the well-being of each person and their health and mental health particularly. So those are the 3 strands we're going to be discussing. And there's just one thing I wanted to say before we start talking about that, where we go from here. And that's one more guiding principle of the trust that I would like us to adopt, and that is to enjoy the journey. As I said at the beginning, it is a long one. In fact, I'm not sure it actually has any end, but because that's not the point of it. If you work together on a vision of hope, that's fun, it's inspiring. It doesn't really matter that utopia is unattainable. Simply by starting on the road together, we've kind of got there. So just thinking about how we work together, this disparate network that I started off talking about. This last slide is based on one of Grant's, and his was about the makeup of an effective organisational team. We used to call it the DNA of an effective organisation. And his words were the ones on the left. So you need leaders who can envision, inspire and enable. You need organisers who can build teams, empower and energise. You need problem solvers who can do root cause analysis and look at evidence-based solution choices, not based on dogma or prejudice or anything, actually looking at the facts, coming up with things that might work as a solution to a problem. And you need engineers who can actually turn those theories into reality, into real things, into bridges that will stand up, and who will challenge assumptions, test theories, do the things that engineers do. And I've kind of mapped that thinking into terms of the types of people that we may have in our team. We have a lot of creatives who can envision where we're going and provide inspiration. But we need people also who are good at operations, who can organise things, who can build teams, get people working together, energise people, support them, train them, whatever it needs. We need the deep dive scientists who can ferret away at a problem until they get to the bottom of it and just shut everything out while they focus on that one problem that needs solution. And then we need the practical people, the engineers, who will look at what scientists do and go, well, that's brilliant, but it's not going to stand up for 5 minutes. You've got to do it this way and that way and that other way. So those people working together really create a really powerful team. And it doesn't need heroes coming in and telling them what to do, because it's about understanding how we work together to create things, to celebrate what we created and go on and do more of it. So that's enough rabbiting from me. If you have been, thanks for listening. And I'll just end with a slide there of Grant actually presenting his leadership, organisation, problem solving, effective engineering slide. And I will hand you back to Peter to open the floor, I think, for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Sue. I will stop your sharing now. There we are. Come back to seeing us all. It's a challenge. It's a very big thing. I would like to encourage discussion now. So I have put, as Sue went through in the chat, the various links to the original documents and websites where things come from. So you can just click on that if you want to know more. We're going to have this discussion on localization, sustainability, well-being. What does that mean? How do we proceed? How can we influence the environment, the society, and the economy? How can we turn this into something real and practical, understanding that we are just a small group? What I would like you to do, maybe as a starting point, is take a few minutes and go to the Menti website. I've clicked the link there, which should avoid you having to enter the 6-digit code. So if you can go to that and give us a few ideas as to what the trust should be focusing on and what you think is critical in that. It's just 2 questions. It should go fairly quickly. And I have unmuted everyone, so you can actually speak up now and tell us what you think as well.
Silence.
For those of you who are technologically savvy or lazy, I've just put up the QR code that you can scan. So you don't even have to click on the... Yes, typing on a tablet is always annoying. So give me a thumbs up when you're done. It looks like lovely weather over there, Tom. Yeah. No, we're not jealous. No, we're not jealous, Tom. Yes, Sue, you too.
I'll raise you a lock.
Tom, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
Okay. I pressed my bar that didn't work, and I thought you turned me on. That's why. Anyway, I submitted 3 words. Did you get them? I don't get into.
I have received some words. I have got completed feedback from 3 people so far.
Good. Okay, this is working. We don't get any feedback. The feedback was.
Oops, someone's just left.
Richard.
Don't know who just left.
I had a message from Richard to say he had to go.
Oh yes, Richard, I got to go. Yep.
When is Thomas coming back?
Somebody else. Is it worth sharing what we've got, Peter, to see if it inspires?
Apparently, I've only got feedback from 3 people so far, which kind of confuses me. And I'm worried that I'll influence people by sharing it too soon.
For me, I'm here out of curiosity more than anything else. So at the moment, I don't really have any ideas that fit, but I'm sure I shall in the future.
Sure, there is a fit.
So this is the word cloud from what we've got so far. And it seems nobody got to the second question.
Going to be a bit slow, everyone.
Okay, take time.
I see all three of mine in that picture. Three things I see.
I certainly see one of yours.
Yeah.
Possibly all three.
Clarify long range goals and work in small increments are all three mine.
Yeah.
Three got.
As soon as I saw the word quantify, I knew where it came from.
I would get the chance.
Nothing for the second question yet. Nothing on feedback yet. Okay. Oops. Move things about. So, otherwise, any reactions, anything you want to share, question, challenge, talk about?
Right. I was going to try and write this down, but it's hopeless on a tablet because I lose everybody in. Anyway, we've been over 2,000 years getting to this point because half the trouble, I suspect, is the fact that the biggest bully is always in charge. And I don't quite know how we deal with that.
I was listening to a very interesting piece broadcast by Channel 4 News this morning by a Dutch historian, I think it was, talking about the British government's attitude at the outbreak of World War II and the panic amongst the government when they realised that Germany was going to bomb civilians in Britain. Because the leaders assumed that every ordinary people behaved in just the same selfish way that they behaved. People who are in positions of leadership tend to be very selfish, very self-obsessed, very driven. That's how they get to be leaders. And they panicked because they assumed everybody was like them and that there would be a complete breakdown of law and order and everybody would find for panic when the Blitz started and the Germans started bombing. And actually when it happened, the opposite happened. People kept calm and carried on. They wouldn't be beaten. They came together. The sort of dry sense of humour came out, where you had a sort of half demolished shop that had a sign outside saying a bit more open than usual.
Sorry, everyone. My tablet is messing me around.
If you want to say it, Nick, I will write it down and fill it in later.
What program was that, Sue?
I'll share it with you on Facebook later because it
That worked well.
where I got it from, so I'll share it with you there.
The interesting continuation to that story was when the British decided that they would demoralize the Germans by bombing them.
Sorry, my tablet is
Because
messing me
this whole,
around.
this whole concept of keep calm and carry on is typical British, and the Germans will panic and be demoralized. So they carpet bombed Germany and found that the Germans were just as motivated to keep on going.
Sorry, my tablet is messing me around.
It's human.
That's fascinating.
Sorry, I've screwed things up. Yes, and my point was really in answer to Chris's original comment. These people have power because we let them have power over us. This is why we come back to the well-being aspect of this being one of the keys. And this is where the whole mindfulness movement comes from as well, is actually finding your own inner strength, your own ability to ground yourself in what you know really matters. And then you can expand.
Sorry, my tablet is messing me around.
Sorry?
Nick is having problems with his tablet.
Yes. Nick, do you just want to say the words you wanted to share?
Maybe I'll think about it. So I've got tablet. My tablet is messing me around. I've got a kind of personal situation where I'm dealing with, so I don't know how much use I'm going to be honest with you.
Don't worry about it. We'll pick it up afterwards. But I think that was some people are I think one of the things we need to be aware of, although we've got our three strands, well-being, localization, and sustainability, there's a huge crossover between those strands, and they all complement each other, they all support each other. We don't want to get into silos.
I'm thinking, coming back to the statement just now that it's taken us 2,000 years because the biggest bully is always in charge. When I look at the two big bullies that are in charge in the UK and the US at this point, they are people who won elections by giving very simplistic responses to extremely complex problems. They were not interested in the idea of having to go into the details and understand what the impact and the risks were. They just had a quick line of make America great and get Brexit done, and that was all they needed. I think it's a question of education.
I think it's actually, education is part of it.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yep, thanks, Jackie. I think empowerment is a better word because it's more than just education. It is about learning to learn, which actually a lot of education doesn't do. The best teachers do. But there are a lot of people who have been taught to, and actually boys particularly are taught this, I think, are taught to be good. You get on in school if you do as you're told. And if you're a bit of a rebel and you actually question status quo, you can be seen as not being good. So I think we have actually a vast number of people who've got through life by doing as they're told. And they've got promoted by doing what they're told. And so while it is education, it's actually more about finding ways of enabling people to discover things for themselves.
Well, the power of critical thinking then.
Yes, but we mustn't be too, I'm very conscious that people see these things in different ways. And when we say, oh, people should be like this, or they should be like that, or they should think this, or they should think that, or behave in this way, we're actually falling into the same control freakery as the heroes or villains who want to be in government. It's finding a way of actually accepting that people are people and they're all different and they all see the world differently and they all understand it differently. And it's digging down to the things that connect us at the most. This is why music is powerful, because it doesn't involve words. It involves an emotional response to something, and you share it with other people in that moment in which the music is made. And there's no intellectual, well, the sort of intellectual work of the musicians playing it maybe, but it's not an intellectualization of the argument. It is just a gut reaction. And it's that kind of acceptance of our place in nature that we need to be striving to achieve. And you don't get there by telling people what to think. It's show, not tell. It's leading people into a space and saying, I like this space, do you like this space?
I think I mostly agree with that, but I still think there's a place for critical thinking, in the sense that, for example, if you see what's going on now, I have, for example, if you have a look on my Facebook page, I made an observation that the people that voted for Brexit seem to be the people that are supporting Boris and Dominic at the moment. And it seems to be true. And then there's a chap who's jumped in, and his viewpoint is as wrong as a flat earth viewpoint, and they won't bother to look at other information. And I don't see how you'll ever capture those people. But that's me. I'm not suggesting that it's not doable.
I mean, we have this in most of my current husband Andy's family. Most of them voted for Brexit, and they will not engage in arguments.
Yeah.
And I think this comes from a place, I think the whole Brexit thing, and probably the vote for Trump is the same. Once you start accepting, and I think it comes from a place of pain. I think it comes from a place of disempowerment of people, where people are not listened to, their lives are marginalised, their time is monopolised by work and worries and anxieties. They've got debt piled up to their ears. They dare not stop running on the treadmill because there's a horrible pit right underneath them that they're going to fall into. And as we come out of the pandemic, or as we go through the pandemic, God knows if we're coming out of it, there's going to be more and more people in that position. I know there are, from talking to my daughters, a lot of younger people, working age people, retired obviously, who sympathise with the wellbeing message, but in their own lives, they have got to prioritise exchange value, because otherwise they can't put food on the table. They can't keep a roof over their heads.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think possibly that the Trust Network can be looking at, given that by and large we tend to be of Grant's era, you know, my vintage, older people, is creating escape routes for those people. So if you have a community that is going to support somebody who will go out on a limb and start up a small business, maybe somewhere, get out of the rat race, and that community can provide them a level of support, so that if they've got to take financial risk, they've got to sell the house, they know that somebody there has got their back. They are not going to be left destitute. They're not going to be chucked out on the street and have their family, they have to bear the blame of having ruined their kids' lives, sort of thing, because they took a chance on this thing that we all say we should be doing. Because it's very easy for me to sit here in my lovely house in Scotland with a comfortable pension and say all these things. But people out there in the real world, in working lives, have got the most god-awful choices to be making going forward. And it's how do we help them to do the thing they really want to do, rather than the thing that they are being forced to do by economic circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. And that's community then. It really is building strong community and demonstrating that it's a strong community. It's not very easy currently where I live, which is in a 1930s semi-detached big estate, which has no community centres, and the local pub has been converted to a McDonald's.
Yeah.
However, I know. Sorry, I was muting myself, Peter, because I do theatre work, and I'm quite used to muting and unmuting as I need to talk. So I thought, rather than have all the local kids joining us.
Okay, I got a message saying you'd raised your hand, so I thought you were trying to say something.
I beg you. I was trying to do a thumbs up to Sue to say I agree with what she was saying.
I saw
don't know
the
whether that
thumbs up, but the message said you'd raised your hand.
no, that was me trying to do thumbs down again. Oh, not thumbs down, but take
Yeah.
that out. I noticed Tom wanted to say something, so I'm going out of this for a minute.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just a short for my ideas. You'll find a reference to a video that we just got released today on sustainability planning that I made. But long story short, what I found is that people with good intentions like us have such unclear goals that nobody understands them the same way, and they're not really agreeing to the same thing. So what I'm pitching for is whatever goals we do formulate need to be formulated much clearer than, for example, the United Nations sustainability goals, which are too vague and ambiguous. And I will help with that when we start formulating goals. Okay, that's number one. And number two, I have another idea, let's call it incremental delivery of value. And whatever we do, rather than saying we'll beaver away with good intention and maybe nothing will happen for 20 years, I believe that it is possible to decompose whatever problems are out there into smaller problems where we can have as an objective to do something practical, you might even say measurable, in the short term, within a year. Okay, so two ideas that I will help with whenever people say, yes, we'd be interested in that. Clarification of the goals so nobody can misunderstand them, so we don't misunderstand each other. And the second is decomposition into practical things that can be done step by step so we attain something in our remaining lifetimes. That's it. So you want more on that information, you will find the sustainability planning in the chat. Is one way of figuring out what the heck is he talking about. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom, and that's going to be really valuable in helping us with the next stage of refining this. As you'll appreciate, we're slightly familiar with your approach, and I'm going to try and make as much use of it as we can. I think the other important thing about short, achievable goals is the part of the enjoying the journey thing is to celebrate. When we achieve something, let's celebrate the hell out of it, because there's little enough to celebrate. And we have musicians and storytellers and artists and creatives in our network, quite a lot of them. And so the scope for celebrating achievements, I think, is great. And that will then inspire people to go on and do more. That's been the experience of running the Folkale Festival. We always said, Grant said early on during the history of the festival, that we said it was the best ever Pig's Ear Folkale. And the next year, he said, well, our advertising slogan is going to be the best ever Pig's Ear Folkale. And I said, well, we had that last year. And he said, yes, and we're going to have it this year as well. And every year, we had to try and figure out how we were going to make the festival better than it was last year. And it was brilliant last year, so how the hell are we going to make it better? And that's a really enthusing discussion to be having. It was really good. How are we going to make it better?
And I think that was a big part of today's webinar, is to try and get feedback as to what is important in these vague objectives we have at this point. We'd really like to know what can be done. What are your priorities?
uh, part of what I try to explain to people is that first you need clarification so that there is agreement about one and the same objective and not misunderstandings. That is the basis upon which you prioritize. You can't prioritize a vague, misunderstood objective. You have to get it clear first. That's step one. And then we can talk about prioritizing something which is truly understood correctly by all parties.
So,
Yep.
I think perhaps we've probably come to the end of where we can get to today, Peter.
I think so.
And we have recorded this. We will be sharing that. There were a number of other people who also signed up to the webinar who weren't able to take part. And so I think the thing is just to continue the discussion. We'll go away and think about, you know, what was been said today, and there will be, I think, another one in this webinar series coming up when I suspect we will be looking in more detail at one of those areas once we've put a bit more flesh on the bones, as it were. So I think it only remains to say thank you all very much for taking part, and I hope this is the start of something really tangible, really productive, that we can feel that we are engaged in this bigger movement. It's not just us, to build back better, to make things work in a better way than they did before.
And before you all go, I'm going to put the link back up here. If you could drop a line here regarding feedback. That was the second question. You should have a second page. The first page is the one that asked for your prime objectives. The second page is feedback and is free format entry. So I'd like feedback on the webinar and what we're trying to achieve, any comments you have, for those of you who are not struggling with a tablet.
Just to say that I always welcome constructive criticism as well. So if you feel it was irrelevant, too high level, not the thing you were expected, I'm quite happy to hear that as well. Mm-hmm. And maybe you didn't want to share that publicly, but please feel free to give honest feedback on what you thought and what you feel about being part of the Grant Rule Trust network, whether it's for you, whether you don't see it being for you, or where we go from here.
There are only two types of feedback, supportive or constructive. Supportive is feel good and useless.
What? I came here not knowing what this was all about, and now I have a better idea. And the other thing is, while the recording can be made available, was it a PowerPoint slideshow or something? Can that be made available?
Sue, can you share the PowerPoint slide?
Well, yes, there is the PowerPoint slide pack. I've also put together a sort of written version of the talk, if you like. So
I shared the document in the chat earlier on. I'll share it again. So there's a PDF which should come across in the chat that you should be able to download.
Yeah. And that we'll be making that available, the link to recording and the PDF follow-up, and all the links will be up on the Grant Rule Trust website. Just a little time to do it.
Yeah.
I can confirm that I got the slides through the download, yeah.
Okay, right. So, and if any of you actually have taken part in this webinar and you're not actually signed up to the Grant Rule Trust mailing list, I would encourage you to do that, because it enables us to keep in touch with you more reliably. And the link for that is on grantrule.org as well. It's just in the top corner to sign up to it. We won't inundate you with emails. It's just when we have something relevant to say.
Inundate away, I deal with that. Right, so is this the point where we go, you hang up first? No, you hang up first.
This is the point at which I say thank you very much and end the meeting, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
If you can
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
continue
much.
filling
Yeah.
out feedback, and then we'll end the meeting. Thank you all for your participation, and hope to hear from you soon.
Right. Good. And away I go. Bye-bye.
Do I end the meeting, Peter, or wait for people to go? You're muted.
I was hoping, Pauline, you could stay on for a few more minutes.
Okay.
Okay, then I shall.
Whose view was that? Was that Tom's view?
Yes, that was
Wow.
my.
Wow.
That's the Oslo Fjord where I am.
Fantastic.
Yes. Any of you are in Oslo, you should take contact with me. Might get invited for a beer and a swim.
Yeah, great.
Although we have to see what Sue has in the locks. Okay. Anyway, let's see. I'm trying to push a button called leave. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Tom. Thanks a lot,
Thank
mate.
Tom has frozen.
Well, it's Norway.
No, I don't know. Oops,
He's still there.
he's still there. Remove. Okay, I have removed him. He's still there, even though I've removed him. Okay, whatever. I will download the feedback. Nobody gave any feedback on the second page, but I'll leave it open for a bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure what happened, but there seems to have been some kind of problem. I've got an error message, which appears to be meaningless.
What sort of a problem?
I don't know. It says error.
Helpful.
Very useful. But I'll download what we have. And when do we want to go over this?
I don't want to leave it another week, personally, if we can squeeze some time
Okay.
in before then. Maybe after the weekend.
Yeah, I think because I've got Saturday, we've got a virtual sing around for the folktale. Sunday, I've got a Blairmore Hall meeting, so it's going to have to be after the weekend.
Yeah, Monday's the first, isn't it? What's the diary looking like?
I think Monday's okay.
Let me just get my diary up.
What's that? Oh, that was, yeah, no, that's dead. That was a real meeting. That won't happen. So Monday the 1st is okay for me.
Okay.
Calendar. That's this week. Next week. I've got a number of things. If we can do it at 11, that would suit me.
Yeah, I can do 11.
11 on Monday, yeah.
I thought the presentation was very good, Sue. Well done.
Yeah, it went very well.
Thank you. I wasn't quite sure if it was a bit high level for some participants, or do you think it actually made sense as a story?
No, I think it made perfect sense as a story. I mean, I'm fairly new to the game, and I understood it.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you. That's reassuring to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plotting is always a game because you have to go back and re-put bits in that you suddenly behind you want to refer to back to.
Yes, I knew Tom was going to mention some sort of agile way of, you know, small increments. That's why I put, you know, pilot. I think that's what we need to do is if we can get an early pilot done within 6 months or something like that and show some results.
Yep.
That would be a boon, I think, to our cause.
Yes. So, I mean, the thing is, this goes kind of hand in hand with growing the network in the sense that we need to think about what sort of a pilot we're looking to do so that we can go out and find some people we could do it with.
Yes.
Yeah.
James didn't come on, did he?
No, he
No.
didn't make it.
So I don't think I'd use him as a pilot because he just seems a little hit and miss. So
Yeah, and he is.
No offence to him.
No. I mean, it's interesting that we've had some of the people from Scotland on, the Keep Beautiful Scotland group, which our local Blairmore Village Trust have been engaged with. And when I mentioned in the presentation that Blairmore itself has a patch of community land, that land is owned by Blairmore Village Trust, which is a community interest company, charity, but it's Contrade. They did a consultation in 2015 and they were talking about putting up some holiday cottages on the land to generate income. That hasn't happened, and I think the thinking's changed a bit because there is a deal of resentment up here about the reliance on holiday lets, because obviously the more holiday lets, the fewer residents you have, the more the community dwindles. So there's a whole bunch of rethinking about, well, where on earth do we generate an income for the community? In Ardentinny, just up the road from us, they have an income stream because they've got some, they've got a couple of hydro plants in the hills just behind them, and that generates an income for them. Blairmore's not really suitable for that, so we need, so there's a whole bunch of work around that, and the Scottish Inn that may be more helpful, I don't know. I'm just conscious everybody's going to have so much catching up to do with things already in existence that probably new projects are not the thing to be focusing on now, having just said that.
Nick is coming back.
Hello, Nick, what's going on?
Well, I've got the sort of what's going on is there's something very personal, but I mean, I would like to make a personal, I mean, like it's basically what I said to you on Facebook. I mean, I've got my own, I'm on my own, I'm in a flat, I've got sort of problems around sort of staying around financially. I mean, like, but I mean, like, you know me, I've got a doctorate, I'm doing sort of progress reports, I've got sort of, I've got creative writing. I've got a group that I'm running on the internet right now, which is kind of my focus. But I'm terrified because of having to. I am absolutely terrified of universal credit. I am someone judging me. I am sort of, and I'm trying to do what I like and trying to move forward, and I just don't want someone sort of dragging me away from what I love.
Yeah. So I think you're somebody who that before, and I don't have any magic answers right now. But I hear what you're saying, Nick. All I can say is that we will take that on board, and what we can do to help support you given that